Imagine the first boom of cannon fire shattering the pre-dawn silence over Charleston Harbor. April 12, 1861, Confederate batteries open up on a lonely brick fort flying the stars and stripes. No massive casualties, no epic charges, just 34 hours of bombardment that forced surrender. Yet those shots ignited the bloodiest conflict in American history, claiming over 600,000 lives and tearing the nation apart. This wasn't random aggression. South Carolina, the defiant first to secede, chose this moment to force the issue: states' rights, slavery, sovereignty. The war began here not by accident, but by design. How did a small coastal colony rise to become the flashpoint that fractured the Union, and what shadows does that decision still cast today? Long before the guns of Sumter, South Carolina emerged from English ambition and Caribbean ambition. In 1663, King Charles II rewarded 8 loyal lords proprietors with a vast charter stretching from Virginia to Spanish Florida. They named it Carolina, after the Latin for Charles. Settlement began in earnest in 1670, when English colonists from overcrowded Barbados arrived on the Ashley River, founding Charles Town, later Charleston. These Barbadian planters brought a brutal system: large plantations worked by enslaved Africans. Early crops like tobacco gave way to rice in the 1690s. Low-country swamps proved perfect for tidal cultivation, and West African slaves, many already skilled in rice growing, turned the tidewater into gold. By the early 1700s, indigo joined rice as a cash crop, its deep blue dye fetching high prices in Europe. Enslaved people outnumbered whites by the 1730s, creating one of the most unequal societies in the colonies. Charleston grew into a bustling port, elegant with brick mansions and cobblestone streets, yet built on human bondage. The Stono Rebellion in 1739, the largest slave uprising in the colonial era, saw dozens killed, hardening racial controls. The proprietors' rule faltered amid corruption and neglect. By 1729, the Crown took over. South Carolina split from North Carolina, becoming a royal colony, prosperous but precarious, its wealth tied to slavery and export. Revolution tested loyalties. South Carolina's fight was vicious, almost a civil war within a civil war. Patriots clashed with loyalists, neighbors turned on neighbors. British forces captured Charleston in 1780, the worst American defeat of the war, holding it until 1782. Inland, brutal guerrilla fighting raged. Battles at Kings Mountain and Cowpens turned the tide in the South, but at terrible cost. Independence won. The state ratified the Constitution in 1788, eighth to join, but unease lingered. The invention of the cotton gin in 1793 exploded demand for short staple cotton, spreading plantations inland. Slavery entrenched deeper. By 1860, enslaved people made up nearly 57% of the population. Nullification Crisis in 1832-33 foreshadowed secession. South Carolina declared federal tariffs null and void, threatening force. President Jackson backed down with compromise, but the state flexed its muscle: sovereignty over federal law. Fire-eaters grew louder, convinced the North threatened their way of life. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 lit the fuse. South Carolina saw no path forward in a Republican-led union. On December 20, 1860, a convention unanimously passed the Ordinance of Secession, the first state to leave. "The Union is dissolved," declared the document. 6 more states followed, forming the Confederacy in February 1861. Fort Sumter became the flashpoint. Major Robert Anderson moved his small garrison from vulnerable Fort Moultrie to the unfinished island fort in Charleston Harbor. South Carolina demanded surrender. When Lincoln sent a supply ship, the Star of the West, in January 1861, Citadel cadets fired on it, forcing retreat. Tensions mounted. April 1861, Confederate General P.G.T. Beauregard, under orders from Jefferson Davis, demanded evacuation. Anderson refused. At 4:30 a.m. on April 12, the bombardment began. Edmund Ruffin, Agging fire-eater, reportedly fired the first shot. For 34 hours, shells rained down. No direct deaths in combat, but the fort's barracks caught fire. Anderson surrendered April 13. Confederates raised their flag over Sumter. The war had begun. South Carolina's role wasn't just symbolic. It supplied troops. Blockade runners slipped through Charleston, Ironclads like the CSS Hunley, the first submarine to sink an enemy ship, were built here. Yet the state suffered brutally. Sherman's march to the sea veered north in 1865, torching Columbia, the capital, in a firestorm still debated. Accident or arson? 1/5 of white fighting-age men died. Economy shattered, plantations ruined. Reconstruction brought radical change and backlash. Black majority voted Republican. African Americans held office, including in Congress. The 1868 Constitution expanded rights, but violence erupted. Red shirts, Ku Klux Klan terrorized. In 1876, disputed elections saw Wade Hampton seize power amid fraud and intimidation. Federal troops withdrew in 1877. Jim Crow descended. Sharecropping trapped freed people in debt. Segregation codified inequality. The 20th century shifted slowly. Textiles rose in the upcountry, drawing mills from the north. Military bases expanded. Civil rights struggles intensified. Briggs v. Elliott, 1951, challenged school segregation, feeding Brown v. Board. Desegregation came hard. Charleston's hospitals integrated late. Today, South Carolina thrives in transformation. Charleston remains a jewel, historic charm drawing millions in tourism. Ports boom as global trade hub. Automotive giants like BMW and Volvo build cars in the upstate. Aerospace and advanced manufacturing grow. Military presence endures at bases like Joint Base Charleston. Culturally, Gullah Geechee heritage preserves African roots in lowcountry language, food, crafts. Beaches from Myrtle to Hilton Head lure visitors. Yet echoes remain, debates over Confederate monuments, racial reckoning after Charleston church shooting in 2015, where 9 black parishioners died. The state confronts its past while embracing diversity. South Carolina's influence persists. As a bellwether in some elections, its politics reflect national divides. Economic resurgence shows resilience. South Carolina didn't stumble into the Civil War. It stepped forward, convinced its survival demanded it. From rice fields built on bondage to the first shots at Sumter, the state embodied the contradictions that defined America. Liberty proclaimed, freedom denied, wealth created, suffering inflicted. The war began here, but so did the long reckoning. In modern Charleston, where tourists stroll Battery streets and Fort Sumter stands silent in the harbor, the question lingers. How do we honor history without glorifying pain? How do we build unity from division? South Carolina, where the war officially began, still teaches that no wound heals without truth. The harbor waters remember, so must we.